Your body is 30% cocktail sauce. Okay, not really. But people believe equally dumb stuff. Like that your uncle says binge drinking on holidays is just testosterone doing its thing. Your coworker blames constant interrupting on dominance wiring. And somehow older guys chasing girls half their age call it fertility window science. America has turned evolution into the world's laziest excuse for bad behavior. And we found all 25 of the most ridiculous ones people actually believe. So like this video, comment which excuse your ex used on you, and subscribe, because number 12 is going to make you lose it. 1. There is a popular excuse floating around that men are biologically wired to cheat because ancient hunters needed to spread their seed across the land. Biology never actually signed off on that excuse. Most mammals, including primates, stick to one partner or a few by choice, and not because some ancient chromosome forces their hand. Wolves and swans mate for life, and even the humble prairie vole acts like a tiny, furry, hopeless romantic. Blaming evolution for wandering eyes is really just humans dressing up poor decisions in a lab coat and calling it science. 2. Road rage gets blamed on leftover caveman fight-or-flight kicking back in during rush hour traffic. Cavemen never got stuck behind someone doing 30 in the fast lane while scrolling through their phone. There was no ancient saber-toothed tiger idling at a red light testing anyone's patience back then. This is really just modern impatience wearing a fur coat and blaming ancestry for bad manners on the road. Real fight or flight was about actual survival and not about who merges first onto the highway during a Monday commute. 3. There is a theory that racism is simply an ancient survival instinct left over from tribes protecting themselves against outsiders. Early tribalism was real, but it never came bundled with hatred as a required feature. Cooperation between different groups happened just as often as conflict throughout human history. Trading and forming alliances with neighboring tribes were common survival strategies long before modern prejudice ever showed up. Calling racism ancestral gives ancient humans far too little credit for getting along, and gives modern excuses far too much credit for being biological. 4. Hoarding piles of money often gets excused as leftover scarcity brain programming from famine days when food was unpredictable. Squirrels bury nuts because winter is coming and starvation is a real threat. Billionaires sitting on more money than entire countries are not bracing for a famine anytime soon. There is no upcoming ice age that requires a superyacht as emergency shelter. This excuse borrows the language of survival to justify behavior that has nothing to do with surviving anything at all. 5. Jealous and controlling partners sometimes get labeled as simply practicing mate guarding, as if evolution demanded it. In the animal kingdom, real mate guarding usually just means staying physically close to a partner. It does not mean secretly reading someone's private messages or tracking their location every hour of the day. Nature never asked anyone to install tracking software on a partner's phone. What gets called instinct here is really just insecurity dressed up in a Darwin costume that Darwin never approved. 6. Sexist gender roles are often defended as the natural division of labor from ancient hunter-gatherer societies. Actual anthropological research tells a very different and far more balanced story. Ancient women hunted and tracked game just as often as men gathered food and cared for children. Skeletons of female hunters have even been found buried alongside hunting tools. The strict job assignments people imagine from prehistory look a lot more like a modern invention than an ancient rulebook anyone followed. 7. Overeating junk food constantly gets blamed on ancient fat storage programming built for surviving lean times. Ancestors dealt with unpredictable food supply and occasional famine, which is a fair point on its own. None of them, however, ever had a drive-thru open 24 hours serving fries at 3 in the morning. This excuse blames biology for a food environment that did not exist until very recently. The real culprit is convenience and marketing, rather than some ancient hunger switch begging to be fed non-stop. 8. Laziness frequently gets rebranded as smart energy conservation, supposedly inherited from ancestors who needed to save strength for hunting. Conserving energy before chasing down dinner across miles of terrain makes complete sense on its own. Ignoring a sink full of dishes or a work deadline for 6 straight weeks does not require any hunting at all. Modern procrastination is not a survival strategy since it is simply avoidance with better branding attached to it. Nature rewarded saving energy for real threats and never once for dodging chores on a Tuesday. 9. Being drawn to unpredictable and moody partners sometimes gets explained away as sexual selection favoring dominant genes. Mood swings are not actually recognized as a fitness signal anywhere in evolutionary biology. This idea borrows scientific-sounding language without any real science backing it up at all. Attraction to chaos is closer to folk psychology than to Darwin's actual research. Nature selects for traits that help survival and reproduction, and being difficult to predict has never been one of them. 10. Fear of commitment often gets excused as a built-in short-term mating strategy, left over from ancestral biology. Plenty of species across the animal kingdom form lifelong pair bonds without any hesitation at all. Wolves and albatrosses and gibbons commit to one partner for life, without needing any convincing. Commitment issues in humans usually come from personal experiences and fear of vulnerability rather than ancient programming. Blaming evolution here is really just outsourcing personal growth work to biology that was never involved. 11. Disrespecting the elderly sometimes gets excused with the idea that they are simply no longer useful for survival. This ignores the grandmother hypothesis, which shows how vital elders were to ancient group survival. Grandmothers historically helped raise children and pass down critical knowledge about food, medicine, and danger. Groups with involved elders often had better survival rates for younger generations. Writing off older people as useless erases one of the most important support systems early humans actually had. 12. Homophobia sometimes gets defended as an evolved reflex, meant to protect the gene pool from extinction. Same-sex behavior has actually been documented in over 1,500 different species across nature. Penguins, dolphins, and countless birds all show same-sex pairing without any evolutionary crisis following. Nature clearly never received the memo that this was supposed to be a problem. Using evolution to justify prejudice ignores just how common and natural this behavior already is in the wild. 13. Interrupting people constantly sometimes gets excused as assertive dominance wiring left over from ancient leadership instincts. Interrupting is actually a learned conversational habit shaped by confidence, culture, and upbringing rather than biology. Some cultures view interrupting as engaged conversation, while others see it as plain rudeness. There is no ancient tribal leader who earned respect purely by talking over everyone else. This behavior says a lot more about manners than it does about any evolutionary survival advantage. 14. Flashy spending sometimes gets defended as human peacocking, meant to attract attention and signal status. Peacocks display bright feathers using nothing but their own bodies and zero financial risk involved. Humans flashing wealth often rely on loans, credit cards, and debt that peacocks never have to consider. A peacock has never once had to worry about a repossessed car or a maxed-out credit limit. This excuse conveniently forgets that showing off in nature does not come with monthly interest payments attached. 15. Gossiping sometimes gets defended as ancestral social status tracking used to keep tabs on the tribe. Tracking information about others for safety reasons is very different from spreading gossip specifically to hurt someone. Ancient gossip likely helped identify who was trustworthy or dangerous within a small community. Modern gossip often exists purely to damage someone's reputation for entertainment or personal gain. Turning harmless information tracking into a weapon has very little to do with any ancient survival skill. 16. Ghosting someone suddenly sometimes gets excused as an instinctive threat avoidance response wired deep into human biology. Avoiding an actual dangerous predator and avoiding an awkward text message are simply not the same category of threat. Real threat avoidance historically involved things like fleeing wild animals or dangerous strangers. Disappearing after a few dates because conversation feels uncomfortable does not fall into that same survival category. This excuse mistakes basic conflict avoidance skills for some kind of ancient defense mechanism. 17. Cutthroat competitiveness sometimes gets justified using the phrase survival of the fittest, as if Darwin approved of office betrayal. Darwin's original theory was actually about adaptation to environment, rather than aggressive competition between individuals. Fitness in evolutionary terms simply means reproducing and surviving successfully within an environment. It was never a scientific endorsement for stepping over coworkers to grab a promotion. Misusing Darwin to justify workplace ruthlessness stretches his research far beyond anything he ever actually said. 18. Catcalling sometimes gets excused as an uncontrollable visual mating reflex that humans supposedly cannot help. Humans manage to control countless reflexes and impulses every single day without any trouble at all. People hold back sneezes, laughter, and comments constantly in professional and social settings. This particular reflex apparently only fails specifically in public toward strangers walking down the street. That pattern says far more about learned entitlement than it does about any biological impulse anyone cannot control. 19. Holding grudges sometimes gets defended as reciprocal altruism, which supposedly reinforces trust and fairness within a group. Reciprocal altruism is actually about mutual benefit, where both sides gain something from cooperation. Grudges, however, usually involve one-sided punishment with no mutual benefit exchanged at all. Nursing resentment for years does not build trust or cooperation with anyone involved. This excuse borrows a cooperative evolutionary concept to justify something that is really just personal bitterness in disguise. 20. Excluding people who look different sometimes gets defended using the phrase fitness signaling, borrowed loosely from evolutionary biology. Fitness signaling in nature actually refers to traits that indicate health or reproductive potential to a potential mate. Personal attraction preferences are one thing, while social exclusion and cruelty are an entirely different matter. Nature never suggested that differences in appearance justify treating someone as lesser. This excuse blurs the line between simple preference and outright prejudice using confusing scientific-sounding language. 21. Older men chasing much younger women sometimes gets defended using the idea of fertility windows as a biological justification. This explanation often works backward from a personal preference and then dresses it up as hard science afterward. Fertility arguments ignore that plenty of older men are simply drawn to youth for reasons having nothing to do with reproduction. Attraction shaped by culture and ego gets relabeled as biology to sound more respectable. This excuse turns a personal choice into a scientific claim it was never actually built to support. 22. Favoring your own children over others sometimes gets defended using the concept of kin selection from evolutionary biology. Kin selection actually explains why relatives cooperate and help each other survive within a family group. It was never meant to excuse actively harming or mistreating people outside that family circle. Loving your own kids is completely natural and expected by any reasonable standard. Using kin selection to justify cruelty toward non-relatives stretches a cooperative concept into something it was never designed to defend. 23. Binge drinking and reckless risk-taking sometimes gets blamed entirely on testosterone doing its natural thing. Testosterone can influence confidence and risk tolerance, which is a fair and well-documented point. It does not, however, remove someone's ability to say no to a sixth shot at last call. Plenty of people with high testosterone levels make responsible choices every single day without issue. Blaming a hormone for personal decisions ignores the simple fact that self-control is still a choice. 24. Leaders throwing tantrums in meetings sometimes gets excused as silverback dominance behavior borrowed straight from guerrilla troops. Real silverbacks actually spend most of their energy protecting and guiding their troop rather than terrorizing it. Guerrillas show patience, structure, and calm authority far more often than sudden outbursts of rage. Yelling at interns over a typo has nothing in common with actual silverback leadership in the wild. This excuse insults guerrillas far more than it excuses any human throwing a tantrum at work. 25. Women tearing each other down sometimes gets excused as simple instinctive mate competition wired into female biology. Framing social cruelty this way ignores decades of research showing this behavior is largely learned and culturally reinforced. Media, upbringing, and social pressure shape rivalry far more than any ancient mating instinct ever could. Plenty of cultures and friend groups show women supporting each other without any competition involved at all. Calling this biology lets a very human and very avoidable behavior completely off the hook. So there they are, 25 so-called evolutionary excuses that were really just bad behavior, hiding behind a lab coat. Evolution explains why humans survived. It was never a free pass for cheating, laziness, cruelty, or bad manners on the highway. Biology gave people instincts. Choices are still choices. If this busted a myth you actually believed, hit subscribe and join the Liebuster squad. Drop a comment telling me which point surprised you the most, and share this with a friend who still blames their attitude on cavemen. Now tell me this, which human excuse should Liebuster investigate next? Stick around, because the next video on your screen busts another lie you have probably heard your whole life.